What lurks behind those unassuming storefronts in Cleveland, Ohio? It's the Buckland Museum of Witchcraft and Magic. So, welcome back to the Buckland Museum Frankenstein Radio Control Room, broadcasting out of our back cave underneath the Buckland Museum of Witchcraft in the west side of Cleveland, Ohio. My name is Stephen Intermill, and I operate the museum with my wife, Jillian, and in partnership with Tony Rotunda. So, I just spent some time packing recent orders, and I'll be heading to the post office tomorrow morning. So if you want to support the museum, time is now. bucklandmuseum.org. I hope everyone is staying safe from the virus right now. I was just contacted by a frequent visitor to the museum letting me know that they just got over it, and I thought, oh, geez. So good vibes to them and their family. We're going to be discussing witches on film today with Heather Greene. So if you have any questions, please comment. Our founder, Raymond Buckland, had his hand in some Hollywood witchcraft, including the film Necromancing, starring Orson Welles, and you can find that on Amazon Prime. So, hi, Heather. And Heather, how's it going? Welcome to the Buckland Museum in Exile. I'm glad that you're here. We were first in contact in 2017 when our founder, Raymond Buckland, sounds like a biker movie back there. And you were working at the Wild Hunt, and you were tasked with writing his obituary. I seem to remember there was some backstory to that. Anything that you want to share?
Yeah, it was funny. The backstory is kind of funny, and like I told you guys when we met up this February, that it was kind of it was coming first full circle since Raymond Buckland wrote the first witchcraft book I ever owned. But I had decided for the first time in my 6 years with the Wild Hunt that I was going to take a week off, and decided, okay, this will be a week off. I put all the pieces in place. I had everybody lined up to do their work. Everybody was signed. The assistant editor was in charge, and everything looked good. And I left for the beach. Was enjoying myself by myself at the beach for the first time, and then I got the message that Ray had passed, and so I wrote his obituary, or what I like to call life celebration or memorial piece from the beach in the sun in Florida. And I spent the entire day in my hotel room writing that while I was at the beach. So it was like I enjoyed it. I love writing memorial pieces. So it definitely it was difficult. It was inspiring. And it really was full circle, since really Raymond Buckland's and his Big Blue Book were what got me started on the path to begin with.
So that was it, huh? Because that was a follow-up question here. Like, how did you discover witchcraft? Was it just something that was always around, or one day you wandered into Walden Books and there was the complete book of witchcraft?
No, it was around before that. That was just the first book I got. So it was the first sort of education outside of wandering into crystal shops in the Village in New York. I had been fascinated with, I had picked up a few tarot things, or, I was dabbling. I had a deck, astrology books, that kind of thing, crystals. So I was interested, and kind of learned a lot of the philosophy behind witchcraft from art, philosophy, science. That sort of was all congealing and sort of landed in my head as, okay, witchcraft. And I ran into an older woman who was, who I learned was a witch. She had little herb packets and stuff like that. I was in her house, and it kind of was like, my mind just was like blown. I'm like, whoa, this is something real. And so I think it wasn't maybe a week later that I went to Barnes & Noble on Fifth Avenue in New York and found his book and read it. I joke, I got on the subway, A train uptown, had my book out the whole way, and then got up to my parents' apartment and got on the couch and opened the book, and there I was. Hey, what you reading, Heather? A book about witchcraft. Oh, okay.
Yes, they weren't too freaked out. At least she's
No, not at
reading.
all. My parents are very artsy and liberal, so they didn't care.
How fun. So did you ever get a chance to meet Ray or correspond with him at all?
I corresponded with him. I never met him in person. That's one of the downsides to all this. I really wish I had even 5 minutes would have been nice, but we never crossed paths, and only through email.
He was such a sweet person to spend time with. I really we carry on his legacy here in some ways, but it's I really miss just like sending him emails and just like his just truly funny responses. He was a bit of a trickster, bit of a joker, but sincere about like his passions and his beliefs. And I think that's really why his books are still so popular. I think the sincerity comes through that Ray, he knew it was important that he was carrying on the tradition there. So, your day job is you're an editor for Llewellyn, right? So how are things right now? You're busy?
Yeah, very busy. Yes, I'm an acquisitions editor at Llewellyn. I've been doing that for a little over 2 years. And yeah, I mean, I'm busy. Everybody who's talking about being bored at home, that isn't me right now. I think a lot of my writers and a lot of authors I'm working with are, inside stuck. So they're writing up a storm, and, that's great. And luckily people need books. And so far, Llewellyn offices are closed to some degree because of the stay-at-home orders in Minnesota, but I work from home in Atlanta anyway, so that hasn't changed for me any. And I just seem to be really busy, which is something that's a good thing for everybody.
Is there anything that you can talk about coming up that you're excited to share?
Let's see. I don't have my schedule in front of me, and I have to be clear, but we just had Simply Wicca just came out this month, which is a basic Wicca book by the Stewarts. That's a good one. We have, let's see, Jo Graham's Winter is coming out, which is a follow-up to The Great Year, which she wrote, which is a sort of more of an intermediate book about living on the wheel and cycles. Very interesting book. And what else just came out? Intuitive Witchcraft just came out. In January, we had Crooked Path, which is another traditional witchcraft book. Of course, I'm leaving out all the other ones, but it's what's popping into my head.
We had the pleasure of talking to Estrella Taylor, the writer of Intuitive Witchcraft, last week. So I was just thinking about a book that goes back a bit in Llewellyn here. Pulled this out the other day. Colin's Magic Curriculum. You familiar with this at all?
I am not familiar with that one.
I think this is kind of like the complete book of ceremonial magic that you guys had just put out. I kind of feel like this might be like kind of in some way the earliest version of it. So
what year is that one?
I'm guessing like 70. Let's take a look here. It's a good read. It's on sale here at our museum if we ever open up again. 1969.
Wow.
So, this is the type of book that we carry here in our bookshop. So I was so excited for the complete book of ceremonial magic, because I was like, man, this is kind of like the one book I've been waiting to come out to share with our visitors. So, I mean, we'll open one day. And when we do, I can't wait to share it with people, because it's, I like to say it's like the book that I needed when I was 17 that I didn't have. So
it is, and I think that's the way it was designed. It was quite the masterpiece, and they had a big celebration for it, and everybody was super excited. It's got some great introductory information and some information that people that already practice will just enjoy reading it. It's so comprehensive.
Yeah, and I was there at the book launch party at PantheaCon, and that was a lot of fun. I was like, whoa, Juan Milo Duquette's over there. Tabitha are over there. Wow. But anyway, we're here to talk about you and witches in film. So can you tell me what's the first time you ever noticed a witch in a movie where you're like, huh, their ideas intrigue me. I'd like to subscribe to their newsletter.
Well, the first time I saw a witch in a movie, or the first time I saw a witch in a movie was probably The Wizard of Oz when I was a little girl. But it wasn't until The Craft came out that I realized there was something more to it, because it was at that point I was already practicing witchcraft. I had already read Buckland's book at that point, and I was and I was also studying film at that point. I was I have a bachelor's in film studies as well as a master's, and I was studying in my master's, and most of my studies and my work I'm interested is the cross section between culture and film and visual media, and politics also. So you see all these things playing out, and watching these movies and watching these witch movies in the 90s, I noticed intersections and commonalities of expression and meaning and symbol. And so that was when I started putting this together, that there was more to the witch in movies and television than just entertainment or horror fear or fantasy.
Right. Now, the thing I think is really neat about the movie The Craft is, like, I think it's like 3 of the 4 main characters all have witch tendencies or maybe self-identify as witches themselves. And I think that kind of comes through in the movie, because it's you could tell that there was some sophistication behind the writing of it, where they had an understanding of what witchcraft was and what Wicca is, and the spirituality behind it, where I know a lot of people kind of like, oh, The Craft, poo-poo it, but it was kind of a perfect beginner text in a lot of ways. So you can kind of have an idea of what, like, drawing the quarters would be. You know what I'm getting at?
Yeah, and there's a lot of reasons for that. The craft is one of the big markers in my study, and in looking at the evolution of witch films in American cinema, and it's for several reasons. Is first of all, it's exactly what you said. It's one of the first times a pagan Wiccan witch influenced the film in a significant way, positively. Okay, so you had Paul Hewson and Buckland and some others throwing things at early 70s films, but those were not portrayed as positive. These were not positive portrayals of witchcraft. That was evil devil worship type stuff. That's a different thing. Here you had a high priestess that lived in California, member of Covenant of the Goddess, who was a consultant. And so all of the stuff that you are seeing, that you're recognizing as very influential, very much Wicca, was actually Wicca. And if I remember correctly, and I quote her in my book, she wasn't 100% pleased with how they eventually portrayed witchcraft in the film, but she wasn't 100% put off either. She didn't protest. So there were some things they kind of changed a little bit and she wasn't thrilled about, but a movie's a movie. It's not going to be accurate. Like I always say, if people say, well, why don't they portray us as real? Well, if they did, nobody would want to watch the movie because it's boring. We're just like regular people. We're not very exciting on a daily basis. So they did have to change it. They did have to make it into a Hollywood film, and they did that. So there were some things there. And it is one of the first films that introduces that spirituality. It also introduces a mother figure who's a witch, who's positive, which is really nice. It's the store owner. It introduces witchcraft. It introduces the theme that, it's not the first one to do it, but close, the theme that witches are women who have suffered. So, and they turn to witchcraft to become empowered. So you have that theme running through it. And this specifically is teenagers in this case. So you have a lot of pieces in this film that are brand new. She is really the first, not she, what am I saying? What's the character's name? Rachel True's character is the first person of color to appear positively as a witch. and not a member of some voodoo or othering process, character process. And so there's a lot of pieces, and it was released right at the end of the Satanic Panic. So it bridges the line between representation in the Satanic Panic and representation after that, which is more positive.
So speaking of Satanic Panic, I am one of the people who, a few years ago, I was working for a company and I was interviewed by Geraldo Rivera, and my boss said, hey, ask him about his other museum. And I said, well, this guy, Raymond Buckland, I have his collection on display down the street. And he was like, who's Raymond Buckland? And I said, well, probably most known for bringing the religion of Wicca to America. Wicca, witchcraft, Satanist. Then he points at me and he's like, Satanist. And I kind of found it kind of funny. I was just like, oh boy, we're back to the 80s. So we have a comment from Todd Hansen saying hi from Atlanta, and that's where you're at.
Hi,
right?
Yeah.
And
Hi, Todd.
I dream of a good dramatic film that features a sympathetic Wiccan character one day. And then we have Paul from Memphis saying hi. Hi, Paul. So if anybody has any questions, please comment, because we can be a bit interactive here. And so what do you think about this movie right here? This came out a couple years ago, and it looks like a perfect Hammer film when you see it, doesn't it? The Love Witch.
I wrote a review of that for The Wild Hunt, and spoke to Anna, the director, a number of times about her background and what she was doing. So I think the film is it's not perfect in its in many ways, in some of its portrayals, and you have to sort of figure out what she's doing to really appreciate the film. And so what I love about it is that she captured this kitschiness from the 1960s, and she did it very well. I mean, from the fact that she actually used film and not video, the coloring, it really works. Unfortunately, if you don't know what she's doing, you might go, okay, what's going on here?
Which a lot of people kind of did when they watched it. I think.
Yeah, they're like, what? This is a little strange. What am I watching? Which I think is a reaction. But if you talk to her and you know what she was going for, that kind of pulp feel, that kitschiness, and then you sort of understand the deeper parts of it, it's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And she did try to give a positive portrayal of Wiccans and witches in that. And that's probably, as kitschy as it is, the closest you're going to get to a representation of Wiccans in a narrative American, let's say, mainstream film at this point.
What I really love is there's this whole part where the main character, she's going to different witch shops and she's selling them pieces, right? Handcrafted witch items. And she gave us some of these to be part of our our permanent collection. And I mean, I think this is just so cool because it really just captures such an important thing of witch culture, which is the craft nature of everything, right? Whenever you go to a witchcraft shop, there's always stuff created by local witches there. It's definitely part of the whole thing. And I thought, I remember watching the movie and I was just like, wow, she really, really captured something that I don't think is really something that many people would even notice in the first place.
No, I mean, she captured a lot of the pieces. She has, she doesn't assign gender to witches. There's also nudity amongst women and men. If you look at, she's trying to play off of the 1970s horror witch films in many ways, and those were very gender specific. The men were always dressed, the women were always naked, and that's the way the groups are. A
movie like this one right here, Witchcraft.
Right. But that was a different period of time, and what they were doing was sensationalism and not really trying to do a true representation of witchcraft in any way. But she does that. She brings that out. So it's definitely a period. She definitely hits on pieces. She talks about, she uses some witchcraft rituals, which are real. So she does do all of that, and there's a certain amount of respect. People didn't like the Renaissance thing, but there's a certain amount of blend of, Renaissance aesthetic with some witchcraft communities. So it's not totally false. It's very much a caricature in many ways, I think, is the best way to put it. And I think she did a really good portrait of, I think the film is a portrait and a caricature, and then is great. What I like even better is how she captures the character's narrative, because the theme of women who are scorned becoming witches and turning to witchcraft is a big theme, especially in the 2000s.
Yeah, so Lisa James isn't a satire of LaVey's Satanic Witch. I don't.
Not really.
I don't think so, but yeah, I found it very entertaining. So, what else you got? What's the first witch movie that you saw, like, after The Craft? Like, where did it go?
Where did it go from there? Well,
like
just
planting seeds in your head.
So it was The Craft, and then there's another one called Little Witches, which is actually a Canadian movie. I mentioned it in my book, but I really don't get into it. It's almost it was made the same year, but it looks like it's the exact same film.
Really?
But a little more satanic. So this is that has more of the satanic flavor. It's not quite as nuanced as The Craft, but it's very similar. And then after that, at the time, it was Practical Magic. I'm just trying to think of the big films here. And then, of course, not shortly after that was the hold on a second, my brain will open up for a second. Oh gosh, hold on. What's the big movie? What was the big movie? My brain just stopped. But 1999 release of the, hold on, oh, well, okay, hold on. Now I'm looking, the Blair Witch Project is what I was thinking of. But before that, and I'm reminded by my book here, is that during that period of time, I also noticed you had Wicca in TV. And that was the other piece of of noticing, is that you had The Craft, then you had Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and there was a Wiccan in there. And you want to talk about a sympathetic Wiccan character that Todd mentions, but not Buffy, Willow becomes that character in many ways and is very realistic. And she is one of course, she goes off the deep end into what we might call her shadow side, but then she comes back. So there's an arc there. You also had Charmed coming out. So you had all of these witchy things happening. And at the same time, in the background, that's when the Harry Potter books started to get published. They weren't films yet at that point, but you had what I call a big witch cycle.
So right around the time I became somehow, I'm not sure how this happened, but I became kind of slightly obsessed with a TV show called Passions. I don't know if you've ever seen it before, but there was a witch named, I think her name was Tabitha, and she had a little doll named Timmy that she would animate and bring to life. And this was this wild soap opera that was on TV pretty much like every afternoon at like 3 p.m. And which was like right there, it was around the time of The Craft, the time of like Willow and Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So really part of the zeitgeist at the time, which makes me think about this one.
Bewitched.
Probably my favorite TV show when I was a kid. Our first cat, when I was 4 years old, I named it Tabitha. It was my sister's cat, but I was like, you should name it Tabitha because it's a black cat, and pretty much the greatest TV show when I was a kid. Were you a fan?
It was so fun. I watched it. I didn't watch a ton of it until much later, so I was not around when it was on. But it was a huge watershed show when it came on originally in the mid 60s. And Yes, I was a fan when I could actually get to it in reruns, and it was so fun to watch. Of course, who wasn't walking around trying to shake their nose and make things happen? Clean your room. It didn't work. I loved all those shows, and that, and the Addams Family. I loved watching the Addams Family too. That was another really big fun and with a witch character in it. But the interesting thing with Bewitched, it was so popular. It went off the air in the early 70s, and then they tried to do a spin-off called Tabitha. I don't know if you ever saw it.
No.
So I never saw it either, and it was so poorly done and got such bad reviews, you can't even watch it. You can't even, it's so hard to get even copies of it. But apparently Tabitha and her brother are grown and they're working. And so it goes from there. That's the premise of it. And it was not well received. It was on, I think, one season maybe. So you can't even get a hold of that one.
Really? I have to find that.
Yeah, and then of course they did the movie in I think 2007, sometime in the mid 2000s. They did a movie with Nicole Kidman called Bewitched.
Yeah.
It's just it's
cute, but
yes, exactly cute, but.
So Marion says, "Don't forget about Sabrina." Of course not. We really can't do that. And Passion's Tabitha was allegedly part of Bewitched. Said her parents were Darren and Samantha. Oh, okay, that's right. That's right. Yeah, I remember when Dr. Bombay showed up. That was great. So maybe Tabitha was the grown-up Tabitha. Kelvin, a frequent commenter, says, "I love Bewitched. Maurice and Uncle Arthur are my favorite warlocks." Yeah, same here, Kelvin. I think I think we all know witches like Uncle Arthur, right?
He's a classic. The Uncle Arthur character is such a classic character, a male witch character. What I define as of the clown witch. So the clown witch, you have similar characters in I Married a Witch, the father in that case, and you have in Bell Book and Candle, you have the brother who's played by Jack Lemmon. Brilliant. Jack Lemmon is amazing as the brother witch. So you get those characters, that kind of offbeat male witch character, what I call a clown witch.
I see that. So Samantha Joe saying that Uncle Arthur was the best. I agree. So I'm trying to think of when I first really got introduced to witches as a kid through media, and of course there was Bewitched, but then there was also this film right here, Escape to Witch Mountain. And I haven't seen it since, but I remember like leaving the theater as a little kid, just completely freaked out, somehow considering that there was some kind of like witch deep state society that was going to like take over or something. I have to return to that. But then I saw this one here, and I was like, magic is real, and it comes in cats from outer space.
Right. Both of those movies are not really witch movies. Both of those, those are outer space, the magic of outer space movies. So I remember those two, and I loved both. I could not get enough of The Cat from Outer Space. I mean that alone was like my jam as a kid. So that, and I remember The Escape from Witch Mountain, and it's not really, it's more an outer space movie, that kind of thing, falls into that realm.
I just remember.
So, yeah. The word witch is used in a lot of film titles that have nothing to do with witchcraft.
I thought about a movie that I haven't seen since then, but I remember being completely freaked out by it. The Watcher in the Woods. Was that a witch movie? Do you remember?
I know the title, but let me see if I included it. I don't know that is actually one that I included. If it is, I saw so many movies, I can't even tell you how many I watched for this book. No, I don't have it in here, but I can't remember too much about it.
So there is a recent film that came out a few years ago, and I have this hanging in the back of the museum in what I call our 6660s division. And I've named it Ginger, and it's a long convoluted story about the red in the beard and Goya having the best ginger beer in my opinion. But everyone that comes in, they're just like, there he is, Black Phillip. Why do you think Black Phillip is really like resonates with our culture at large? It seems like people are really, really drawn to this version of the goat.
Well, I think right now is a prime time, especially when the film came out. It's been building. We're in another witch cycle, which typically happen, according to my studies, happen when there's a lot of tension and stress in our society and change and shifting. So we're having that right now. And so I think people are feeling disempowered in a lot of ways. And Black Phillip gives people an outlet to for freedom, for self-freedom, for self-empowerment, for agency, in the same way he does for the character. He offers the character a freedom from entrapment, from the culture's entrapment, from her father, from the puritanical society. So he's offering her that freedom. So in that way, he's offering the reader, excuse me, I'm still in editor territory, the viewer, the freedom. And so he provides that. There's a darkness to him that resonates with us internally very deeply. I think, especially people who are into the craft and into the occult. We're looking down into the shadows of ourselves to find the power within ourselves. And I think he represents that in many ways. He also is a symbol for the occult in many ways, and that resonates with people who practice these symbols of power.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything that you're saying there. So Todd's saying, speaking of Disney, consider bed knobs and broomsticks. That was a classic. Jillian, who she's actually, you met Jillian back in February.
Yep.
She's wondering, is there a movie that you think got the initiation process right?
I think that's a loaded question because the initiation process is so different across witchcraft practices. So what would right be? So my answer would be probably not. Although there are a few movies in the 70s that try to offer pieces of the initiation process that may have got them slightly right. I think there's a Five-Hole Kiss in one of the 70s movies, horror movies, for example. But if you're talking about a full-blown Wiccan or witchcraft initiation ritual, no.
What about like a film like Legacy of the Witch, where they would film these exploitative versions of witchcraft, but then there would actually be people like Alex Sanders performing stuff. It's I guess what I'm saying is, you reveal a little bit without showing everything.
Right, and my study is only on narrative films, so I'm not going to be looking at. I didn't look at the films that were documentaries,
right,
or ones that were, and there's films that people have made and published and promoted and stuff that don't fall into this category. I was specifically looking at either mainstream or close to mainstream narrative films, which is a totally different thing than looking at documentaries and ones that were trying to capture a society. I didn't look at those because that's a different question entirely.
So, are there any movies that you would say are witch films without being obviously witch films? Anything that you've ever seen where you're like, I know what they're getting at here without like actually finding out?
Oh boy, that's on the spot. So I'm going to show you a graphic. I'm going to show you a graphic in my book. And so yes, there are films that I consider witch films that most people might not consider witch films because and let me see if I can find my little graphic. This is something I have. Whoop, where's the camera? Right there. Okay.
All right. Okay.
So you can see there is a category. The way I look at it is a category of witch films. So the center circle, witch is a main character. Those are obviously witch films. That would be the Sabrina TV show, for example. Witch is a secondary character or antagonist. That would be where the film is focused on somebody else, but the witch is usually an antagonist or a secondary character. That would be like The Wizard of Oz. Then you have witch as a minor character. So like in a film like, and this is going to be a funny film to recognize, but the Cheerleader Die movie, that's a witch as a minor character. She's there to help. She has influence on the narrative and the plot, but she's a minor character. And then you have the Threat of Witchcraft. So the Threat of Witchcraft would be like Conjuring. Would be like, there's not really a witch. You see those in ghost witch films. So it's like the Blair Witch Project would be in that category. So those are the ones I used and accounted as narrative witch films. And so you have a few, like The Conjuring. You might even say Annabelle. There's a Omen, a witch film. You have crossover occult films, which I said, yeah, The Omen's not really a witch film, although the second one has a witch in it. So I got to a lot of dicey stuff. Because magic, and then of course the question of, do I include voodoo films with voodoo priestesses? And I said no, voodoo is treated very differently and needs its own book. So I kind of crossed some lines there. But films that would be witch films that people wouldn't think of as witch films would be things that were a witch as a secondary character, like the Cheerleader movie, which I just, and it's called Cheerleaders Die, I think. People will go, why do you have that in here? And here it is, All Cheerleaders Die. And it was released in 2013. And I think it might have been a remake if I remember correctly. But the premise is that these cheerleaders die and come back to be zombies. And one of them had a very good friend who absolutely happened to be in love with her, who helps her and because she's a witch, she uses her spells to bring these cheerleaders back to take their revenge on the football players who killed them in the first place. So the witch has a really important role. And what's interesting is she's a positive character as well. So it's actually a very bad movie and a very stupid movie that has a very positive witch character in it. And she actually happens to be a lesbian too, which is a nice to see a treatment of that in a non-sensational way as well. As non-sensational as a movie called Die Cheerleaders can be.
Right.
So it's an interesting combination.
Die Cheerleader. I gotta check this out.
Yeah.
So, Kelvin,
it's a terrible movie, Stephen. It's a terrible movie.
I don't know. Turns out that I have a lot of time on my hands these days. Kelvin here is saying, Simon, King of the Witches, 1971. Remember that film? Oh boy, do I! I love that movie. That's an amazing film, and it's one of the first films that actually handled put witchcraft with deity worship. You actually have a witch who's actually showing worship to deities. You also have a male witch, not a clown witch, and not some kind of caricature. You actually have a legitimate male character as the main character who calls himself a witch, specifically. And of course, he is worshiping deities. So it's a very interesting film in the study of American witch films. And one thing I really love about the aesthetic of that film is pretty much exactly how I want to be going around. The costume? I mean? Like, it's just so like aesthetically fantastic with the capes and whatnot. So
yeah, it's a very interesting movie.
Yeah, so we kind of touched on this a bit. People have some free time on their hands right now, being, quarantine times. Do you have any recommendations of some movies that people could catch right now?
I think if you were to, I'm going to list obviously the most important films in looking at the representation of witches in American cinema and television. If I was to do that, I would say you definitely need to look at obviously The Wizard of Oz, because The Wizard of Oz, the Wicked Witch of the West, is the most single influential witch character in our history, in American cultural history. You can't talk American witch without her. in her representation, specifically in the MGM film, not the earlier representations. So that's a really excellent film to start with.
And also, I could point out that there's a Cleveland connection because Margaret Hamilton is one of Cleveland's own. So
nice.
I completely agree.
Yes, you can do that, of course. And I was on a live Facebook feed last week talking about I Married a Witch. And that's a good look at how Salem.
Yeah.
Yes, and that's a good look at how Salem features into the representation of witchcraft and features in movies too, because Salem gets its own little piece in Hollywood language, and of course Bell Book and Candle would be another of the older films that you look at, because that's a precursor to what you see then with How the Witch changes into the 60s with watching several of the episodes of Bewitched, because we're looking at television too, and Bewitched is she probably is not second most influential, but definitely one of the most influential. I would say Rosemary's Baby, another very important witch film and a marker in the change in representation of witchcraft in general and the occult in American film. And another one that's not talked about that much is called Hungry Wives.
Hungry Wives?
Hungry Wives, yes. It's Hungry Wives was done in the 70s, and it's a very good feminist film. If you're looking for a witchcraft film that is particularly feminist and really captures that 1970s Betty Friedan, witchcraft is taking me out of is giving me empowerment as a woman, and doesn't try to say I'm been damaged in any way, just really does a beautiful job. It's a film that was panned, and they tried to re-release it, but failed. They tried to make it sound like it was a porn film, and that I have actually documents that say that that's the way they marketed it, and it's not. It is a bit sensationalistic, but it has a feminist flavor that's really nice. It's called Hungry Wives. It's done by the same guy who did the zombie films at that time. Well, I can't think of his name at the top of my head. Famous director. And it's one of the films. It was made really cheaply, but it is a really good one. Going into the 80s, you're going to see Witches of Eastwick, of course. Flip-flop from Hungry Wives, very anti-feminist in my opinion, but a fun film to watch because Jack Nicholson is fantastic. His acting job in the church at the end is one of the most brilliant acting jobs ever. So I love that scene. So that's a great one to watch, and it gives you a sense of what's coming with the Satanic Panic and how witches and witchcraft was represented at that point, and how it was used to push women down during the 80s. The Craft. Practical Magic is always fun. That's a good light witch film where witches start to be a little bit looser, a little fun. They're represented in the community as just something that's there. And then, of course, the Blair Witch Project, which introduces all of a string of ghost witches and all of that kind of good stuff. So that takes you up to 2000, and we've got more. I can keep going.
I think that's pretty good. Kelvin's wondering about The Seventh Son from 2009. Have you seen that film?
The Seventh Son is not listed in my book, and I off the top of my head, I do not know why. I didn't consider it a witch film for some reason, or it's not American. I'm not 100% sure. I'd have to look it up and tell you why I didn't look at it for my book.
So your book explores American. Have you done any research on like European or Eastern films about witchcraft? Like you just just too much.
Well, it's too much. And my study was I'm particularly interested in how our culture shaped the films, and how our culture and our history shaped the films, and how the film shaped us. And you can't really do that outside. It's like science. You got to set limits and then study within those limits and those criteria. So that's what I was doing here. I have seen witch films that are outside, and I do have a sense of, because I have a background in film history, of how the different industries treated witches. For example, one of the most interesting things is that many of the foreign industries, not England so much, not the UK, but Mexico, Italy, some of the industries and nations that had very strong Catholic cultures, very embedded Catholic cultures, their film industries were not restricted from producing films about witches and about satanic witches. Whereas up until 1968, our film industry was censored. It could not produce films that made witchcraft satanic. So prior to 1968, for the most part, okay, there are no films that have witches as evil satanic beings. There's no satanic witchcraft prior to 1968. Rosemary's Baby was really the first. You have several. Now, remember, we're talking about mainstream Hollywood that obeyed the rules of the censorship code, which is what I was watching. You had a few. You had The House of Black Death in 1965. You had a few, Naked Witch, which was 1964. So you had a few that broke down because the code was breaking down. The code administration was losing control slowly over the 60s and finally lost full control in 1968. And of course, all hell broke loose, literally. But prior to that, so the Mexico, France, and Italy, some of these other countries were able to do that because they didn't have the censorship. So you have satanic witchcraft films much early on. And much earlier on than us. The expression of witchcraft is very different. The treatment of witchcraft, the understanding of witchcraft, the culture's relationship with witchcraft is very different from country to country, and we still see that today. So I kept it just to America. That's my background, and it proved to be very interesting.
So there is a personal favorite film of mine that I'm curious if you have an opinion on. Mm-hmm. And I guess I shouldn't load it up with, that it's one of my favorites right off the bat there. But are you familiar with Night Tide?
Night Tide?
Yeah, no, so it's Cameron Parsons, most known for, she was an incredible artist, but she was married to Jack Parsons, the rocket ship occultist guy. And this is a film that stars Dennis Hopper, and she shows up. I guess she's a witch, and it's super spooky. And I have never seen a more powerful individual in the silver screen other than Cameron in Night Tide. It's so intense, and when she shows up, you can kind of feel like her energy is like transporting from space and time. So
that's amazing.
This used to be on Netflix. I'm not sure if it is or not, but I'd recommend anyone check it out. Hey, Estrella is saying hi. Hi, Estrella.
Hi, Estrella.
And let's see here. So Kelvin is talking about Satanus the Devil Mask, but which of course is more of a documentary. But right. Yeah, I mean, that's about as much of a classic for like occult exploitation as you're ever going to find.
Right. The thing is with this study that I did is it's very comprehensive. I can't say that I haven't missed a film, but you get to those gray areas. First, I say no documentaries, which is a pretty clean cut line. But when you get into the films that deal with magic, occult practice, devil stuff, where's the line between is it a witch film and is it not a witch film? So I had to sort of make some calls on some based on what were they calling the witch? Were they using the term witch? Were they not using the term witch? Sometimes in a lot of the 70s films, they'll call the person a temptress, or they'll call the person something else. Or, sometimes these satanic characters, like in The Omen, they're devil characters. They're devils. And there's occult characters. And you go, is this really a witch film, or is it more? So there's a gray area, and I had to make some calls on some films. So some of the films that you might be mentioning that have sort of that witchy feel are I did not include because they didn't meet the criteria, the randomness of cutting in the gray area.
Yeah, it's I recommend you check out Night Side sometime,
will.
and maybe we could talk sometime in the future, and we'll decide if it's a witch movie or not.
I love to.
Which reminds me, I guess we're gonna try to come to Mystic South. I'm not, I've I'm supposed to be able to present the history of the Buckland Museum there in what is it, July? And it sounds like a great idea right now. I'm not sure if I'll even be able to get down there because hopefully we'll be able to be open by then. And it's kind of difficult to leave here, find somebody to cover it. But I think we'll be hanging out in Atlanta in a couple months. Hopefully, hopefully I haven't heard anything about Mystic South canceling. So
no, and I'm on the board. We haven't canceled yet, but we're watching very closely. We're very concerned about the health of our community, obviously, and the health of the people that come. So we want to make the right call because we also are concerned about all the people who have been stuck in their homes and need a connection to their spiritual community. I know that if we do have it and it is safe, everyone's going to feel very relieved and enjoy being around each other finally. We also, we know there's a lot of people that rely on these for their livelihood, the vendors and some of the presenters, the authors who come and talk and sell books. So we're hoping and praying that we can keep it open, but we're watching the health, and that's going to be the first and foremost. If we feel that's unsafe for our people in any way, we're going to have to cancel. But I'm hoping, I'm doing a lecture on Sabrina. So someone brought up Sabrina. My fascination, Sabrina is probably the second most influential witch of American culture today. And I'm going to be doing a talk on her and how she's evolved from her early days in the 1960s comics to today. And along with karaoke and some other fun things. Mystic South is super fun, but whether it happens this year or not, it will happen next year. So if we can't do 2020 due to the virus, shoot for 2021.
Yeah, that sounds good. I think by this point I'm gonna need a break, from so I'd like to get down there. So the marvelous Ted Hand has just chimed in with comments here. The most interesting witch trial film I've seen recently is the Finnish 2016 Devil's Bride, streaming on Netflix. Yeah, I've heard that's really good, Ted. Thanks for the reminder. I haven't seen it yet, but I hear it's good. I don't know if you have any thoughts on it, Heather.
I haven't seen it, so I'm definitely going to watch it. Thank you.
Yeah, Todd's saying looking forward to Mystic South. Kelvin's wondering about Strange Angel, the Jack Parsons TV show. I haven't seen it yet.
I haven't seen it.
I hear it's pretty cool. I also heard that it got canceled and before the big reveal really happens. But yeah, so
go ahead. Sorry.
No, please. I was just gonna babble.
The biggest problem for me with all these great recommendations y'all were watching is over the period of time, if you have my book, you can see every movie that is listed in the book I watched. And so a period of 3 years, I was just binge watching movie upon movie. So a lot of the TV shows that have 16, 20, 50, hundreds of episodes, I wasn't able to watch them all. Or, more recently, I wasn't able to keep up with the current stuff or foreign stuff that was out. It was like I was in a vacuum of witch films. But if you look at these pages, you can see the number of films just in one chapter. Every chapter comes with a list of all the films referenced or that I watched for the chapter. And there's tons. And so they all bleed together. And then, of course, people are asking me, I've seen this latest movie. Yeah, no, I haven't seen it. I was in a vacuum of occult and witch films for years, which I can't complain about, really.
So what kind of movies are you watching now then?
Oh, whatever I can find. I tell you what. I watched a great British film last night that has nothing to do with witches. I'm trying to stay on the happy side of things right now just because our world is kind of like a horror film right now. So
you're not watching Mega Man?
No. I actually binge watched the the Marvel movies in order, which was super fun to do. Some better than others. I'm watching whatever. What was that?
There's some witches in those films sometimes, right?
There is
the Scarlet Witch, I think.
Yeah, I don't count those as witches. She's an interesting, if I was just looking at characters and just looking at why she's called a witch, that would be an interesting a look. And there's some characters like that. You know, it's a good movie that is not, that I have listed and I talk about, which is not considered a witch film, which most people will go, why do you have this in here? Is, let me think of the name of it right now. I'm going to have to look it up. It's with Vin Diesel. And I always joke about including it. It was in 2000, I'm looking it up here, 2000, Season of the Witch, no, wait, Conan the Barbarian. Oh gosh, okay, so I can't remember the name of it right at the top of my head, but he plays, it's like a witch hunter. Is it called witch? No, it's not Witch Hunter. It's The Last Witch Hunter, I think is the name of it, The Last Witch Hunter. And it's a very interesting film. It's a Vin Diesel movie, so yeah, you're getting what you get with a Vin Diesel movie. But it's interesting because it's one of the few films that actually use Norse characters and sort of a heathen type of feel to it, which you don't see. You have the World Tree in it, and the World Tree is the Queen Witch, and she's more like nature. And she's right and she's wrong, and it's very interesting from a representation of witchcraft's type of look. It's a Vin Diesel movie though, so you get what you get. But it's interesting in terms of the way witchcraft is presented.
Yeah, that sounds kind of neat. I'll definitely check it out. So, Heather, where do people keep up with you?
Well, Facebook.
All right. Facebook.
Facebook is the best way because I'm not an avid social media person. I have too much going on, kids and work and everything, to constantly post to Instagram and Snapchat and whatever else there is. So if you find me on Facebook, follow me on Facebook. A lot of my posts are public. If I know you or know your third cousin once removed, I will bring you in. As long as you're nice in my feed, I leave everybody in, and that's sort of where I post what's going on. My books for Llewellyn, my authors, and I just kind of promote. So Facebook is really the best place. I also have a website just as a placeholder for any projects and some of my writings there, but generally Facebook is where I interact publicly.
So you're working on a revision of your book, Bell Book and Cameras. When, because we promised her some scans of some documents of Raymond Buckland's, and I just need to, I'm the type that really needs a hard deadline. So
I don't have a hard deadline. I'm not working on it right now. I will give you a hard deadline when I have, and then I will hunt you down and I will stand over you. I want to visit anyway.
That's what you have to come. There's one thing that I wanted to point out to you here, something that we have on display. And when I first put it out, this young lady came in like the next day and she got really choked up when she was looking at it. And it is this right here. In a notebook purchased at Kmart is the original manuscript for the complete book of witchcraft.
Wow.
And, it's, the real Buckland heads, when they come in and they see that and they start freaking out a little bit. A lot of people look at it and they go, oh, that's cool. But then the people that know it's cool really, really resonate with it. So I really
hope. That's amazing.
Yeah, I hope to share this with you sometime.
Oh, me too. Yeah. Definitely. That's my first book.
Yeah, so many people. It's my friend Ariok. I was working at Walden Books in the 90s, and it would have been around the time that The Craft came out. And Ariok had a shop down in Mansfield, and he claims that the only reason why he could afford diapers for his kid at the time was because of how many copies of the complete book of witchcraft he'd sell every week.
That's amazing.
I mean, that's magic, right?
Yeah, it's funny because I had that book for years and years and years and years. And it went it went through me through college and grad school and apartment after apartment, and sometime in the last 5 or 6 years, I couldn't find it. It's disappeared. I don't know where it is. The original one I had that I got back in the early 90s is my first book. I mean, it was worn and tore, you know, it was used. And so I don't know what happened to it. And then when when Llewellyn hired me, you know, I was joking with them about how that was my first book, and Llewellyn book was my first book and all that stuff. And, you know, when they hired me, they gave me a new copy. And I feel like, you know, with the, just like doing his memorial piece that I did, is coming back to Llewellyn and working for Llewellyn now has almost come full circle from that as well. So it's kind of nice. And now I have a copy again. It's not the one that I held during my first rituals and initiations and, you know, playing with witchcraft as a baby pagan, but, you know, at least I have it.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So we have a comment from Jessica Brown. Thanks for the awesome movie recommendations. Oh, thank you, Jessica. Thanks for shouting up. Miss you. Hope to see you soon. Kelvin points out that's an old school notebook. It sure is.
Yes.
So we've been on for an hour. I feel like we haven't even scraped the surface really about witchcraft and film. Had so much fun talking to you, Heather. I hope we can have you on here again someday.
I love to. Anytime you want to talk witches in movies and witches in real life and witches who write and author books and whatever you want, just come call me up. I'll love to chat with you anytime, Stephen.
Yeah, that sounds good. So I'm going to say goodbye to the audience if you want to hold on for a second, because I want to give you a proper goodbye. Okay. And hey, you know, one thing I really love about being able to go live in the various ways that we do here is to just kind of keep the dialogue going. So thanks to everyone that tunes in on these. I get messages about them a lot, and you know, I appreciate that people appreciate it, because it's helping keep me sane right now, because I like to be here in the museum and sharing the collection. So thanks to everybody that's been tuning in. I keep trying to figure out a way to say goodbye at the end of these, but I'll just I think I had one the other day that I liked, and it was stay witchy, my friends. All right. Take care. We'll catch you guys next time.